I use those drawings also as inspiration for students. This is a school I have in Beato Angelico's studio in San Marco, here in Piazza San Marco. You're very welcome to visit while you're here during the week. And there I teach anatomy through three-dimensional form. So you see this figure here is a skeleton on one side and musculature on the other side. And these are students copying this model. So they would sculpt all the bones perfectly to millimeter accuracy, and then they would apply each muscle from origin to insertion so as to understand the form and function of each muscle. And here they are working from a different angle. And see in the background you can see the drawing which they're using as a source as well. So they're using the skeleton, drawings and sculpture as ways of penetrating understanding of the human body as a language, okay? So basically I'm approaching the human body and science to penetrate a language, to understand a language, and then I use that language to communicate. So primarily my language is visual, it's the body, and then secondary it's English, and then tertiary it's Italian. So basically developing the drawing as accurately as possible. So what I'm trying to do here, doing life-size drawings so as to get it down to the millimeter accuracy. And once you have that done, then you can start approaching old master drawings. So for instance, this is a drawing I did. It's a copy of a Pontormo fresco. Well, it's a copy of a drawing for a Pontormo fresco. And I advise you all to see this piece. This is the actual fresco itself is in Santa Felicità, which is free to visit. It's on the other side of the Arno, just as you cross the Ponte Vecchio. Magnificent fresco of the Annunciation. And the reason I picked Pontormo is because he manifests the Florentine understanding of drawing, understanding of the penetration of the science of the body as a language, and then he communicates much deeper realities about the human condition through that language. So for instance, he would take anatomy, bone structure, muscle structure, and he would use that to communicate deeper aspects of the human being, like the psychology, spirituality, philosophy and theology behind his understanding. So basically, where I'm coming from is that I use language to penetrate meaning, because all language comes from thought. So what I try to do is use the language to penetrate the thought from which that language comes from. So I take anatomy, I study anatomy so as to penetrate the culture from which this language came from. So if Florence is all about, to me, it's all about drawing. It's all about anatomy and drawing. They're the two major linguistic properties of Florentine culture. And I use those properties to penetrate the meaning from which that language came from, which is generally Christian humanism. And I use that to penetrate the meaning, that philosophy and theology, so as to draw forward what's relevant to contemporary culture. That's essentially where I'm coming from. So I take Pontormo here, I enlarge the drawing to over life sizes, be about 2 meters or over. And then I would take the anatomical drawing from the French academic approach, and then I apply transparencies. So these are transparencies here that are applied to the drawings I've just done, okay? Now these transparencies are broken down into 5 different categories. To teach anatomy is quite intimidating. To learn anatomy is quite intimidating, and some students here will appreciate that. That when you are studying anatomy, you have all these Latin words and they look really complicated. What I try to do is I break it down into 5 different categories, 5 different functions. And as we all know, form follows function. So if you understand the function, then you understand the form much better. So I apply each muscle from origin to insertion here, origin here to insertion here, and then I color code it, okay? So for instance, this muscle, this group of muscles here, I'm not going to go into the Latin because it just complicates things. So I group the muscles together for their action. So this here is green, color-coded as an extensor. So an extensor extends the leg, okay? This is from Monty Python here. And to understand what this muscle does at the back here is a flexor, so it pulls the muscle back, okay? Pulls the leg back. So to understand extensor and flexor is very important because this is the anatomical logic behind the body. So once you understand the anatomical logic, everything makes so much more sense. Otherwise, anatomy becomes really, really complicated and threatening, and people don't want to go near it. But I think it's a very important language which we must understand to communicate the human condition in this way. So that's where I'm coming from. So you have the complementary extensor and flexor, and then you have also the other complementary groups. You have the abductor, which are these orange muscles. They abduct as in to take, or adduct is to take in, okay? So the pectoralis pulls the forearm in, so that's an adductor. And then there's the abductor, which are the blue group here. You notice, the artist will notice that I'm using complementary colors here as well, which kind of helps. So you have the abductor pulling out. So the blue pulls out, this part here pulls out. This muscle here pulls out. So you have the abductor pulling in, or adductor, ADD, pulling in, and abductor pulling out. So they're complementary colors as well. And then the final group is the rotator. This is the yellow group here. So here, and other places. So the rotator, what the rotator does is it rotates the forms, okay? So the external oblique rotates the form. So with that logic, approaching it very scientifically, students understand very clearly, in a very clear language, the basic vocabulary of the body. And with that basic objective vocabulary of the body, you can start approaching the great masters. Change the photograph here. So you can see it clearer there. Extensor, flexor, abductor, adductor, rotator. And now I'm using that logic to approach a great master like Pontormo. The reason I use Pontormo is because he manifests the Florentine language. Now, Pontormo was a student of Del Sarto, who was a student of Michelangelo. So just to give you his lineage. But he's very interesting in that he's got a very strong language. He uses anatomy in a very real way, but he also goes past anatomy. He starts to penetrate philosophy and theology. He supernaturalizes the physical. So he's a very mystical artist, a bit like El Greco, but he's much more tangible, he's much more anatomical, much more sculptural, much more physical, very, very solid. Not that he's better than El Greco, but it's just different language. So I use Pontormo because he's got this solidity, so you can study his work in a very anatomical way. So what I've done here is I've taken a transparency, I've placed it on top of the drawing, and then I've used the skeleton to do an artistic x-ray, so as to pull the skeleton out of the drawing, okay? So that's what you see here, is this faint drawing here of a skeleton.